Nobody really talks about the fear that comes with taking medication. The fear of how you're going to feel once you do. The medication pamphlets have a list of symptoms so huge that you're not really sure if you're going to feel all of them or any of them. It's a gamble, a massive gamble. Especially when your body could produce symptoms that you weren't even in control of. I would first be put on medication at around 16, but medication subscriptions had been given to me way before this. But my mum and I would always accept them as the pediatrician would slide them across the table and we would put it in the glove box and that's where it would stay. I was always curious if it would make me feel better. I just wanted to feel normal. How much I just wanted to feel normal. But my fear of taking it and my mum's fear of me being on it made the thought not even possible to trickle through my mind. Until I was 16, I was older now, but I was severely struggling in attending high school. The morning train ride was the worst. When I would get ready in the morning, I was just thinking if there was any way that I could avoid it, praying that somehow that my mum would just spontaneously decide to drive me in that day. But once my uniform was on and mum was standing at the door ready to wave me goodbye, and she slowly closed the door, a feeling of dread would just waver over me. I felt like I wanted to throw up, but I had to force my legs to keep walking to what I thought was going to be my death. How badly my legs wanted to run back to the safety of my home. By this time, it was just my younger sister and I who would catch the train to school. We would stand in our winter uniforms, wrapped up, feeling really cold, and just wait for the train to whoosh into the station. The doors would open, bringing in the warmth of the train that gave the idea that it seemed inviting. We'd sit, and the beeping of the doors would feel like the closing of my tomb. I was stuck. Each time that the door opened, I would mentally plan my escape. I would think about running through the doors off onto the platform. As the trip rolled on and on, my anxiety would begin to mount. My bladder would begin to fill and I would start to get really panicky. I'd start to jiggle my legs and just push my palms together and just try to focus on breathing. 2 trains like this, every morning to school and back home. It was absolute torture. One does wonder how long you can go on like this, because eventually you think you will break, and what you fear about happening most will happen. I had already been seeing a psychologist for many years, and their way to reassure you would be to tell you that what you feared happening actually hadn't happened. It made sense, but you kind of hated them for being right. Until one frightful day, they wouldn't be able to tell me that it wasn't going to happen.
Sort of back then, before I sort of got diagnosed and got educated on mental health, it's like the stigma of society is you sit in bed crying all day, you've got something wrong with you, you need to toughen up. Like why are you sad? You're playing first grade football, you're on good money, you got everything going for you, things like that. So and even to the point where like you get called a head case, or you're a psycho, or you're in a straitjacket, or you go to a mental asylum. They're sort of all the stigma and the stereotypes surrounding mental health. And I sort of believe that. And that was probably part of the reason why I didn't want to face those demons, because I would have maybe gone into that category. And that's pretty hard to do. And that's why a lot of people don't do it. And they wear that mask and suffer in silence because they're afraid of how they'll be perceived, how they'll be treated, all those sort of things. So I didn't even, like, I knew my mum used to take like antidepressants and things like that. And I just thought it was normal. She used to sit in bed for 3 days and things like that and couldn't get out. But my views on medication back then was if you took medication for your mental health, you're a head case. But now that obviously I've been through the struggles and the things I've been through, I don't. My view on it is if you need to take that to, sometimes it's purely a chemical imbalance with mental illness, and if you're not producing those chemicals to have a balance in your life, why not take medication to help you there? There's no difference between taking like your diabetic medication or your anti-inflammatories to play football or sort of antibiotics to fix a sore throat. It's the same sort of thing. But in saying that, you can't. I for myself and what worked for me, I think it needs to be a balance between coping strategies, your lifestyle, your well-being, as well as your medication. You can't rely totally on your medication, but then still go out and get on the drink all the time, take drugs, don't live a healthy lifestyle. You're not getting enough sleep. You're not doing all those things, but you're just relying on your medication. I don't think that's doing it justice in itself.
I actually think people forget how much courage it takes for someone with severe anxiety or mental health in general to get up and live life every day.
Yeah.
I mean, my son will sometimes say that to me, that people don't realise that I get up every day and I have to make a whole lot of decisions about how I'm going to function.
Yeah.
Conscious choices that the rest of the world take for granted. When I was, in high school in those early years and I was having those uncomfortable feelings about myself, there was a period for about 10 days where I could not go to school. I could not go to bed at night. I could not sleep. There wasn't. I remember one doctor gave me this medication to take, which were little blue tablets, and I have no idea what they were. I mean, I just remember them being a really vivid blue, and my mother was freaking out and said, "You can't take them. You can't take them. I don't know what they're going to do to your mind," and all of that. And I never took them. And in a way, I'm glad I didn't at the time. Not because I'm against medication at all. I'm not. I'm actually very pro-medication, provided it is appropriate and appropriately managed. And I think that's where it falls down a lot, because we don't seem to have enough mechanisms in place to assist people with understanding what's involved in that. But I have to say, and this is just my opinion and my observational experience with some of my friends, I think I would never take a antidepressant from a GP or an anti-whatever from a GP without getting some backup from either a psychologist, the talking therapy, the other sort of therapies. But going back to the little blue pills, I'm glad I didn't start taking them then, because if I'd had a horrific reaction and I didn't have anyone to counsel me on it, I think I would have been quite devastated and probably done a whole lot of other things that mightn't have been healthy. It's not that long ago historically that we used to take people with psych illness and just lock them away.
Yeah.
And put them in cages and water them down and do God knows what. So, it was still fairly early. And even when I was working in the psych unit, there was a limited number of medications that were available for people with, any kind of psych disorder. And you just tried to tweak around those. Mental health is it's simple in a sense that people are hurting in places we can't see, but it's not easy to treat because everyone responds differently, particularly to medications that for some people can have crappy side effects, but there's lots of medications that have crappy side effects. I mean, that medications for any illness have a balance between the benefits and the downside. There isn't any that don't have a side effect. Yeah. You might feel like you're not having a side effect, but one of the side effects is that it's fixing your problem. So it's a positive side effect.
God, it just didn't make sense to me, because at that stage I wasn't feeling depressed. No. I was just anxious about what was happening to my body and why was I going red. And it's hard when you hear these GPs telling you it's an allergic reaction, yet deep down, I'm pretty sure it's not. So I'd pretty much just roped myself up to this anxious being. So when it was great to know finally what it was. It was great to know that I had been diagnosed with anxiety. But when medication came around, I kind of reluctantly took it because I guess you're a GP, you know what you're talking about. But for me, I didn't feel any different. I didn't feel like it helped me at all. And if anything, I was so aware that I was on it that it kind of made me a bit more anxious.
Yeah.
And then actually I was on it when I went to New York to do those 3 months training, and I was lucky enough to be offered a contract with Disney Cruise Lines, which they don't usually hire Australians because they don't come to Australia audition. Because I was in New York, I auditioned and I got the job. I left early, sacrificing thousands of dollars in classes, booking last minute plane tickets to come back to Australia to get medical, police check, and things done for this cruise ship. I am an honest person, so told them that I was on antidepressants, and 5 days before I was due to fly out, I got a generic response from the medical team saying that I was no longer required and they can't go ahead with me and they'll move on with someone else. So that was the point where I was like, I don't need these pills. They're not doing anything for me, and they've just taken away something that I desperately wanted. Holistically, through meditation and yoga and organising your life and looking at it, fitting in sessions at the gym and then fitting in sessions to look after your mental health is what works for me.
Funny you should say that, because I was given, you know, quite an array of tablets, and one of them was Valium. And after a little while, I remember one afternoon that I just, you know, lay down on my carpet in the living space, and I had obviously I'd gone off to sleep, and I've gotten up, and I was so groggy, Nikolina, and I thought, this is the same feeling I had when I was smoking marijuana. I've stopped that. And then I started questioning, well, my body can't differentiate between what I was doing here and a prescription.
Yeah.
Because really, it was reacting in the same way. I didn't want it.
No.
It didn't make it right.
No.
It didn't make it right for me. I was still inflicting an abuse on my body.
Yeah.
And to me, they were one and the same.
Yeah.
So slowly, all of these synthetic substances had to leave my body. It was seeking out now a natural order.
I had only made it a few stops from home, the panic mounting to the point that when the doors opened, I just ran, leaving my sister behind to make a quick decision to grab my bag and follow me. I was hallucinating and I felt really hot. I was sweating, so I started to strip layers of clothing off. Suddenly, irritable bowel kicked in, and I made the platform floor a bathroom.
As in you threw up?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a shitty day. Literally.
Literally.
By this point, I didn't even know who I was. My face had dropped on one side, and I had completely lost control over my speech. I now lay on the platform floor, with no clothing from my waist down. The sharpest pins and needles went through my legs until they became completely solid, and I was unable to move them. I was hallucinating and screaming that someone was trying to cut my legs off. But anyone who actually tried to move towards me brought me excessive amounts of pain. 20 minutes later, my mum's distressed face would turn the corner, and she would eventually manage to get me into the car and take me to the hospital. At the hospital, she washed me down, and they would eventually put me through into emergency. After testing and checking me, all they could say was that I may have had a chemical reaction to the medication that I was taking. The medication that I thought was supposed to be helping me. It's been quite a number of years since that day. I still haven't actually been on a train. I haven't been able to overcome that fear. But what I was able to do was to find a medication that now works for me.
I do the things I do not want to do, and I feel the things I know I'm not supposed to feel. If I hate what I do, if I turn and run to you, will you